What do you get when you bolt a piston engine to the front of an airplane and a jet engine to the back? Apparently, the US Navy called it a fighter, and somehow this strange little airplane accidentally made aviation history.
Most stories have another side. This one's just a little stranger.
I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. The first time I saw a photo of this airplane, I figured it was just another forgotten Navy fighter. Then, I discovered someone online had described it as the mullet of airplanes, business propeller up front, party jet in the back. Honestly, that's probably the best description anyone has ever given the Ryan FR Fireball. To understand why it existed, you have to put yourself right in the middle of World War II. By 1942, everyone knew jet propulsion was the future. The British and the Germans were already flying experimental jet aircraft, and the US Navy wanted to make sure it wasn't left behind. There was just one problem. Early jet engines were terrible for carrier operations. They burned enormous amounts of fuel, accelerated painfully slow, and weren't exactly eager to respond if a pilot suddenly needed full power. Imagine trying to land on a pitching deck of an aircraft carrier. If you missed the arresting wires, you had to immediately add power and climb away for another attempt. With an early jet engine, that wasn't always possible. Rear Admiral John S. McCain Sr. came up with an unusual solution. Instead of choosing between a piston engine or a jet engine, why not build an airplane with both? The piston engine would handle takeoff, cruising, and landing, while a small turbojet hidden in the tail could provide an extra boost of speed whenever the pilot needed it. It sounded strange, but it actually made a surprising amount of sense. Out of 9 competing proposals, the Navy awarded the contract to Ryan Aeronautical. Now, Ryan had an excellent reputation. They had built Charles Lindbergh's famous Spirit of St. Louis. What they hadn't built was a carrier-based fighter. That would become painfully obvious. Still, the Fireball introduced several generally innovative ideas. It became the Navy's first carrier aircraft with tricycle landing gear. That wasn't just a modern styling choice. A tail dragger pointed the exhaust directly downward, and engineers worried the scorching exhaust would damage the wooden carrier decks. Keeping the airplane level solved that problem. Then there was the fuel system. Rather than forcing aircraft carriers to stock 2 different fuels, engineers modified the General Electric J31 turbojet so it could burn the exact same 100-octane aviation gasoline as the piston engine. Both engines literally shared the same fuel supply. The 2 power plants also operated independently. That led to one of my favorite stories. Fireball pilots discovered they could feather the propeller until it completely stopped spinning, then quietly light the jet and fly away from nearby piston fighters. Imagine watching another airplane pull ahead with a completely motionless propeller. I don't know if I'd be impressed or convinced. I just witnessed a ghost. Unfortunately, the engineering brilliance came with some very serious problems. The first prototype broke apart during a high-speed dive when compressibility loads exceeded what the wing could handle. The test pilot was killed. The second prototype suffered essentially the same fate. Then came perhaps the strangest failure of all. The Fireball was one of the Navy's first aircraft to use flush rivets for improved aerodynamics. As the wings flexed during flight, tiny sharp edges around the countersunk rivet holes actually rubbed against nearby rivets. Over time, they sheared them off. That allowed high-pressure air to force its way into the wing, then into the fuselage. The canopy blew off. The wing structure failed. The airplane disintegrated. Engineers eventually limited the Fireball to 5 positive Gs. Not exactly what you'd hope for in a dogfight. Even so, by early 1945, the Navy desperately wanted anything capable of intercepting Japanese kamikaze attacks. The Fireball climbed extremely well, and pilots who flew it generally liked it. One described it as a fantastic little airplane, smaller than an F-6F Hellcat, faster, and surprisingly nimble. VF-66, the Firebirds, received the aircraft in March 1945, but history had other plans. Japan surrendered before the Fireball ever entered combat. The Navy canceled its order of more than 1,000 airplanes. Only 66 would ever be built. Most aircraft would quietly fade into history after that, but the Fireball had one more surprise. On November 6, 1945, Ensign J.C. Jake West was returning to the escort carrier USS Wake Island. Following normal procedure, he already shut down the jet engine. Then, disaster struck. His radial engine failed completely. With almost no altitude to spare, West feathered the dead propeller and restarted the jet. Today, 30 seconds doesn't sound very long, falling towards the ocean. It must have felt like forever. Finally, the jet came alive. West barely reached the carrier, caught the last arresting wire, and slammed into the crash barrier. He walked away. Without intending to, he just completed what many historians considered the first jet-powered landing aboard an aircraft carrier. The British, of course, have their own version of that story. A month later, Captain Eric Winkle Brown intentionally landed a pure jet Sea Vampire aboard HMS Ocean. The British argue theirs was the first true jet carrier landing because the Fireball was a hybrid. Aviation historians have been happily debating that ever since. The Fireball itself never enjoyed a long career. Carrier landings were simply too punishing. Nose gear failures became common. Hard landings wrinkled fuselages. One aircraft even broke completely in half after hitting the deck. Then, in one of the saddest twists of the entire story, structural fatigue caused the Fireball's wing to separate during an aerobatic maneuver. The falling aircraft struck another Fireball below it. Both pilots were killed. One of them was Jake West, the same pilot who had survived that remarkable carrier landing only months earlier. By 1947, inspections revealed widespread structural fatigue throughout the fleet. The Navy retired the Fireball. Ryan attempted one final evolution called the Dark Shark, replacing the piston engine with a turboprop. But by then, true jet fighters had already taken over. The bridge between the two eras was no longer needed. Today, only one Ryan FR Fireball survives. It spent time flying research missions for NACA before eventually finding a permanent home at the Plains of Fame Air Museum in California. Looking back, the Fireball wasn't really the future, but it also wasn't the past. It was something in between, a wonderfully strange, occasionally fragile, and undeniably courageous attempt to solve a problem that had never existed before. And sometimes, those in-between airplanes teach aviation the biggest lessons of all. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.